My name's Mila Bristow and I'm representing the Ecosystem Function Group where we research the role of North Australia's ecosystems in climate regulation and in capturing and preserving significant amounts of carbon. And we spend a lot of time measuring the exchange of energy, carbon and water. And we ask a lot of questions about climate variability and how climate variability and disturbance can impact these ecosystem dynamics in the context of using these ecosystems to counterbalance anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions. You can see here in this image one of the tools we use a lot, which is a flux tower, an eddy covariance flux tower. This is our most recent tower. It's at the Tern Supersite at Litchfield, and it's why you're not seeing Lindsay today. We are led by Lindsay Hutley, who can't be here, but you will hear from him in a little bit. I am a research fellow working in forest ecophys and land use change and plantation forestry. We're supported in the field by Matt Northwood and Mick Brand, our superior technicians, and you can see Matt and Mick here servicing a flux tower or eddy covariance flux tower. And we use the eddy covariance method to record the actual gross primary productivity of an ecosystem via the measurement of heat, water and carbon dioxide exchange above the vegetation. So we spend a lot of time talking about atmospheric physics. Our research is in savannas or mangroves or plantations or wetlands or mine sites. We don't necessarily discriminate between ecosystems, but we broadly divide our projects into savannas futures, land use change, or mangroves and blue carbons. You can see most where our funding comes from: ARC, Tern, and Australian government and various NT-Gov or other state and territory governments. And in the Hutley Lab, we do both discovery science to understand the function and processes of ecosystems from leaf to landscape scale, and we also do applied science to answer questions or come up with solutions to understand how we can make these ecosystems continue to function. So an example of which you're going to hear from Lindsay as he describes a project of mine, my postdoctoral research, looking at the impacts of land use change on greenhouse gas emissions. Here's something Lindsay prepared earlier.
My name is Lindsay Hutley. I'm an Associate Professor in the Research Institute for Environment and Livelihoods, which sits within the School of Environment. The work is in some ways unique in terms of the fact that we're really trying to quantify or capture the emissions in a very fine temporal scale. I don't know there's too many studies where people have been able to try and estimate or measure the emissions from the actual clearing event itself. There has been some work in tropical rainforest systems, the conversion of rainforest into agricultural land systems is a big issue in the tropics. And this is similar. We've got a tropical savanna woodland we're clearing here. And again, we are making observations in real time as the bulldozers are rolling. So that's quite unique. At the moment, most land clearing is fairly small and fairly small parcels, but there's been a gradual increase in land clearing over the decades in North Australia. But if we are to develop the food bowl of North Australia, one assumes that will be associated with a lot more land clearing. So it's really assessing the risks for future land management is what we're interested in helping with.
Thanks, Lindsay. So let me introduce some of our PhD students. We have Jill Segura, who's working on the eco-hydrology of mine site restoration. Pippa Featherston, who's looking at land use change and water resources. Caitlin Moore, who is partitioning savanna productivity. Clint Cameron, working on mangrove restoration and carbon economy. Some new PhD students to our lab, Emily Goodall, working on climate change and savanna function. Ben Brown will be joining us soon as a student also working with Natasha Stacey in the Livelihoods group, looking at mangroves and agro-ecosystems. We have 2 honours students wrapping up in the next few months. I think they're counting it in days. Madeline Goddard, working on sedimentation rates in mangroves. And Mitch Rudge, who's working on fluvial carbon fluxes in savannas. So let's have a quick look at what they do. Here's some results from Jill's recent work where she's coupled a century-scale climate data with an eco-hydrological model to examine the impacts of long-term climate variability on the soil, plant available water to vegetation on the post-mining landform. So she works in this lovely rocky landscape here and asks, can these trees actually continue to grow and will water stay there? It's an unusual hydrological dynamics for this rocky substrate, and Jill's research will determine whether there can be restoration success. Pippa works with similar ecosystem dynamics, but in this time in forest plantations, and asking whether water use in these plantation trees can be compared with pastures in the surrounding native savannas. Emily, who's just finished honours here and is joining us for a PhD, and Caitlin both work in research towards understanding the drivers of savanna productivity and function and how these have produced the savannas we have today, and they also model how these might change in the future. Emily's analysis suggests that it's the role of the Southern Oscillation Index on rainfall, but not on temperature, that's influencing and driving ecosystem function in tropical savannas. And Caitlin's research is separating the role of the seasonal understory of grasses with the perennial overstory of savanna trees. Here's some output from Madeline, who's just wrapping up honours. She's research is looking into the impact of sea level rise and sedimentation in Darwin Harbour mangroves, and the figures here show surface elevation in the seaward mangrove communities at 2 sites in Darwin Harbour since last October, and different responses from the different sites, and it's being driven by the river discharge. You can see Madeline's system that she's set up here. This technique is the global standard for measuring surface elevation change. And Madeline, Clint and the Mangrove Group have established these tools to contribute to decadal monitoring of the surface elevation of mangroves, and they're part of a global network of monitoring coastal wetlands currently vulnerable to sea level change. This is work of Mitch Rudge, who's working on savanna fluvial carbon fluxes and asking where does the carbon go, how quickly does it get there, and what does vegetation influence this. Mitch has been able to quantify how much carbon is in the shallow groundwater under these systems, and he's currently using stable isotope techniques to partition that into different sources and asking which part of it comes from the vegetation and what is from the geological origin. So where will the ecosystem function group be in the near future? Well, we're going to continue to be writing about land use change. We're going to be capturing sink dynamics, just submitted a new ARC discovery project looking at fast and slow carbon pathways. And we also work on very long and short-term timeframes. The image here in the bottom is a project from an ARC sinkholes project where we're looking at sources of carbon, extremely old carbon, right at the bottom of sinkholes across northern Australia. We continue to work in land use change. We plan to have stronger links with the Northern Territory Government through initiatives such as Grow North, which we see as a fertile source of research questions on what might happen to carbon and water under changed systems. We'll continue to work on modelling climate variability and the feedbacks of fire research with our colleagues that we work with collectively here. Of course, we're going to continue to work in mangroves because we see there's a great opportunity to work in this wonderful northern ecosystem. And here's an example of a project that Natasha mentioned, and our research with the Livelihoods group will continue in this blue carbon project. You can see a restoration of mangroves in Sulawesi. So that's where you'll see us. We're usually out in the field. We're the group that tries not to get all the equipment too bogged, but we do spend a lot of time collaborating with modellers here and around the world so that we can interpret this at larger spatial scales. Thank you.